If you're leaving these 5 vintage items on the thrift store shelves, not only are you leaving behind big profits, but you are leaving behind fast sellers on eBay. I knew about one of these items, but the other 4 were items that I used to pick up, but weren't selling very quickly anymore. So I stopped picking them up. But only recently, through some research, I realized these items are hot again. That minimalist style is fading out, and people are heading back into the maximalist, unique items that they want around their homes. I'm going to share with you which 5 items to pick up and what to look for in case it's something you really ought to leave behind. This first one might surprise you. Vintage paint by numbers. These aren't the new ones. These are older paint by numbers that look cute, kitschy, more like folk art. These used to be really popular when I first started reselling 10 to 12 years ago, and they really fell off from being popular. But there's a big resurgence in people wanting vintage paint by numbers art. Let's talk about what to look for, what they're selling for, and what kind of condition they should be in when you're finding them in the wild and you want to resell them on eBay or Etsy. Here you see a vintage paint by numbers of a pair of Pomeranians that sold for $48. And before we go further into what has sold, I want to show you the research that I did so that you know that these are items that are really selling and they're selling well. When I come up here, I've got vintage paint by numbers in the search, and you can see here that in sold and completed listings, there are 957 that sold in the last 90 days. When I take these 2 off, you'll see how many are still up for sale, and that will give you a good idea at how quickly they're selling. The closer those 2 numbers are together, or the sold numbers being bigger, that means that the sell-through rate is a lot faster. So I want to see that the number that are still up for sale are close to 1,000. That would mean that they're selling very, very quickly. If it's more than that, it's okay. If it's a lot more than that, then it might not be something that's selling super quickly. And here you can see 1,100 vintage paint by numbers are up for sale. So because those 2 numbers are so close, I know that this is something that is selling pretty regularly. But let's take a look at what types of paint by numbers are selling. Definitely vintage. I'm seeing animals and landscapes, horses and dogs, cranes, birds, flowers. This vintage paint by number of a vase with koi fish and flowers sold for $50. And this vintage paint by numbers sold for $65. As I'm scrolling through, I'm seeing that on the lower end, it's like $20-ish, but some of them go up to over $100. Here are some vintage paint by number sailboats and Spanish galleons that sold for anywhere from $30 all the way up to $70. I have this sorted by ended recently, and I want to see how much the highest priced one sold for. Here are a pair of cockatiels, I think they are, that sold for $675. And here is a pair of flamingos and some sort of crane that sold for $350. And this is a vintage Fair Wind Rough Sea Ride paint by numbers that sold for around $300, but the best offer was taken. A lighthouse paint by numbers that sold for $250. And here are some more flamingos that sold for over $200. I like when I see multiple items of the same style that are selling for a high ticket price. So that tells me flamingos. Paint by numbers are great, but if I find flamingo paint by numbers, then I may have hit the jackpot. When you're at the thrift store and you find a paint by numbers that you think you might want to sell, some things that you want to look for are water damage, any holes, and check those corner edges to make sure that they're not torn up. The next item is also something that used to sell really well. They're still pretty steady sellers, but there's been a big resurgence in people wanting handmade quilts. I personally love finding quilts. I have a hard time selling them. I think I've sold 1 or 2 that I found, but most of the rest I end up keeping because I know the kind of time and effort and energy and love that goes into these. My mom is a quilter, so I know how much time, dedication, and money goes into these quilts. Here is a bright grandma's flower garden quilt that sold for $85. Let's take a look at how many have sold in the last 90 days, how many are still up for sale so we can get a good idea of that sell-through rate. And then we'll talk about sizes, colors, quality, and what to leave behind if you find one that maybe isn't the right quality for being sold on eBay. Over 4,700 sold and completed listings in the last 90 days for hand quilted quilts. Let's take this off and we'll see how many are still up for sale. There are about 10,000 up for sale. And what that translates to is about 50%. So almost 5,000 sold, 10,000 up for sale. So it still has a really good sell-through rate. A lot of times people are looking for a specific color, pattern, or size of the quilt. Straight off the bat, the most recent sold ones look like not this vintage Carlin Comforts, because that's a store brand one. But here's a country farmhouse, bright colors. Here's another antique red and white that sold for $110. And here are a couple others with stars, the star quilt or the Christmas star that sold for $175 and $149 with best offer taken. I don't sell on auction, so I don't know if this would have been a higher price if they had waited and put it on Buy It Now. And scrolling down, once again, I see this one with the vintage fans that sold for $40. This super bright one, again, this one was on auction that sold for $49.99. I have a feeling it looks smaller, so this might be a crib quilt. And the same goes with this Sunbonnet Sue that sold for $26. It looks like it's also probably a crib size quilt. Usually, the bigger the quilt, the more profit you can get from it. But some patterns and styles are more popular than others. This fan pattern is not quite as popular as some of the patchwork and star patterns. Here you can see this double Irish chain that sold for $105. It's absolutely beautiful. And this quilt with the scalloped edges sold for $348. As I scroll through, you can see automatically that quilts that are intricately made with really nice color patterns tend to sell for more. Here's a wedding ring quilt that sold for $157. Here's a vintage grandmother's flower garden quilt that sold for $107. And you can see the one next to it, the pink one that sold for $20. It says repurpose and repair. This is what to look for when you are looking at quilts that you are considering selling. If you find a quilt that needs to be finished, repurposed, maybe you just found the quilt top and it's not finished off, it hasn't been quilted to the bottom and the batting, these can still sell, but they might sell for less. Something you might consider leaving behind is a quilt that's got a lot of holes, damage, or needing a ton of repair, and also quilts that smell really musty or have really bad stains. Unless you know how to repair them or get the smell out or get the stains out, it may not be worth your time. Now let's look at the highest price that sold. Right off the bat, this is a red and white Hawaiian applique quilt. Hawaiian applique quilts are very desirable. If you find one of these, grab it up. A lot of Hawaiian quilters will not ship their quilt to the buyer in the mainland for fear of it being stolen. So a lot of times if you buy a custom Hawaiian quilt, you either have to go there and pick it up or fly the maker to you to deliver it. This antique crazy quilt is also another one that's sold for over $2,000. And this beautiful yellow quilt sold for $1,375. I would have trouble giving that one up. So you can see there are some quilts that sell for in the thousands of dollars. It's definitely worth taking a trip through the linen section at your thrift store to see if you find any handmade quilts. This next item is one that you've probably heard me talk about before. I love to sell vintage copper pots, and I'm starting with the solid copper pots, but I'm going to also transfer over and show you copper bottom pots because both are big sellers. But I wanted to make a big splash to start with to show you copper can sell for big money. This is a vintage French Mauviel copper saucepan that sold for $372. But I'm going to switch back over to just straight copper pots and pans. They don't have to be vintage. Vintage ones, French ones, made in Portugal, those can sell really well. But even newer pots with copper bottoms can sell really well. Let's take a look at what is selling and what it's selling for. So here I've got just copper pots and pans, 1,000 results for completed and sold listings. And as you're looking here, you'll see some that just have this copper on the bottom. This is a Reselling copper bottom pot that sold for $22.90. This is an emerald copper bottom stock pot that sold for $40. And this set of Reselling copper bottom pots sold for $100. This is where you would have to decide if you want to part them out by each pot or sell them as a lot. You might be able to get more if you sell them individually, if they're selling for $30 or $40 a piece. This set of copper saucepans sold for $300, and here's another Reselling that sold for $145. There are 1,000 plus sold of copper pots and pans. When we take this off, we'll see how many are still up for sale. There are 3,700 up for sale. So the sell-through rate is not as good as some of the others, but it is something that when I get copper pots and pans, I can't keep them listed, especially the solid ones. They sell really, really quickly for me. Now let's come over and see what's the highest selling copper pots. This is a Rifoni Magna set that sold for $800. And this is I'm not even exactly sure what this is. It's a huge kind of urn that sold for about $1,000. When I scroll down, I'm seeing a vintage Reselling big set that sold for about $500, and they did charge about $100 for shipping. Bridge kitchenware copper sauté pan sold for $550. And as I scroll down, you can see over and over, it looks like this person has they've cornered the market in their area for copper pots and pans. Vintage Reselling, copper bottom. I'm wondering if they find them and then wait till they get the full set and then sell them as a full set, because that would be wise. If you're like trying to gather all the pieces to sell it as a complete set, that would be a good idea. However, thinking about the shipping of that. Here's a vintage Williams-Sonoma set that sold for $400. And here's that Mauviel again that sold for $439. Trying to give advice about selling copper pots is a bit tricky, because if I say don't look at ones that are tarnished because that copper can get a patina, that's not exactly accurate, because there are people that will buy it, shine it up, and use it. And if it's dented, if it's vintage, it may not matter. It might actually add character to it. The newer ones, like this vintage Reselling that sold for about $9, I have a feeling it could have done better if it had the lid. But depending on what you get it for, if you've got a whole box of Reselling and you've got one with no lid, either start looking for the lid or maybe lot it up with one of the others. And if you don't mind an $8 to $9 sale, then just list it and sell it. This next one is pretty niche. It's definitely something you won't find a lot of, but if you find it, grab it. We all know that charcuterie boards were really popular for a while there, and they probably still are, but these are round wood breadboards. Rustic kitchen style is definitely coming back, and a lot of people have their eye on these round wood breadboards. There are 48 sold listings for round wood breadboards. Let's take a look at how many are still up for sale. And there are only 51 up for sale, which means they are selling very, very quickly. Let's take a look at which ones are selling best and what to pass up, and you're wondering if it's a good one to flip on eBay. Right off the bat, let's X out this green marble one because it does not belong with this list. But you can see this hand-carved round wood breadboard that sold for about $50. Here's another one that sold for almost $90. And you can see they are not in pristine condition. They definitely have a rustic look to them. And these two sold for right around $90. There's a lot of 3 that sold for $232. Based on what I'm seeing with the solds, it doesn't matter if it's got knife marks or maybe even a little staining. But if it's got chips, cracks, or things that look like bug holes or like a bug has chewed on it, those are definitely out. As you can see, these have got very definitive knife marks on them, and they still sold for a big profit. Let's take a look at the highest priced sold round breadboard. It looks like Bramhall woodware, $160. It's got that word bread on the top of it, sold. And I'm skipping over these lots, but if you find a lot of them, then you've hit the jackpot. Here you see this one that's got a little bit of a burn mark on it, and it's still sold for $120. I'm wondering now how many breadboards I've walked by not knowing that this is something that would sell for a big profit. Next, we have Cabbage-Ware plates. I can't believe I'm actually putting these up, but these are ones that have gotten really popular. They used to be popular, then they fell out for a while, but now they are getting really popular because this farmhouse kitchen is coming back. Again, this is another one that I'm like, I am sure that I walked past some of these cabbage plates and didn't pick them up. Let's take a look at what I left behind, and you might be leaving behind too. So here we've got cabbage plates, and they're also called Cabbage-Ware. So if you're looking up Cabbage-Ware, Cabbage-Ware plates, bowls, etc., 663 sold in the last 90 days. So what are we looking for? We're looking for plates and bowls that look like cabbage leaves. Here's a lot of 4 cabbage plates that sold for $95. Here is a Wedgwood salad dessert plate with a cabbage leaf design that best offer was taken, but was $125. $50 for these. $74.99 for this Bordallo green cabbage salad plate. Here's a Sekla pottery cabbage leaf set that sold for $115. And this Patricia Garrett Great Impressions sold for $64.50. Let's take a look at highest first. This Wedgwood cabbage leaf scalloped edge set sold for $650. This makes me want to run to the thrift store right now. This Bordallo sold for $600. Here's a set of 4 blue cabbage plates that sold for $450. And this Minton Majolica rabbit on cabbage leaf sold for $395. It looks like if you're finding the Wedgwood countryware plates, whatever color they're in, it seems to be one that's selling well. As well as this Bordallo, I'm going to butcher this name, Pinheiro cabbage plate these 2 brands seem to be doing really, really well. So definitely look for ones that are Portugal, Italy, Wedgwood. And I would say look out for crazing, which is that crackling that happens under the glaze. But this one sold for $65 and they put that it has natural crazing. So that crazing might or might not hurt the sale. I would say if it's got a big crack in it, probably leave it behind. There you have it, 5 things that are practical vintage items that people are loving to pick up again. Remember, whether you're thrifting for resale and you're new at this or you've been doing this a long time, it can take patience to start building up to knowing what to find at thrift stores to sell for a good profit on places like eBay and Etsy. Let me know in the comments if these are things you were already looking for and you just didn't tell me, or if any of these were new for you too. And I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.